What's going on, everybody? This is Brent0331. This is live stream 43. And once again, we are talking about the possibility of World War III. Sounds like a lot of dominoes are lining up, and unfortunately, a good possibility that they could fall and set off a series of events that could find us in a third world war. So going to go around the horn here and introduce our panel tonight. First and foremost, no stranger to this panel. We got Les with Pegasus Test on YouTube. Be sure to check him out. Les was a United States Marine, served in the early 90s. He's a veteran of the Gulf War. He has his own training company called Polaris Tactics and Simulations Division. And he's a master of logistics, has his own logistics company, as you guys can see in his polo shirt there. But be sure to check out his channel, Pegasus Test. And he's also the company commander of Bravo Company 1 Shepherd. So thanks for jumping on tonight.
Happy to be here, Brent.
All right, next, my good buddy Chad. Chad and I served together in Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines. Chad is a veteran of the initial invasion of Iraq, 2003. Went back in 2004, hooked a jab in the Battle of Fallujah with 1st LAR. He's a war fighter. And like I said, we served together in Afghanistan. He's a grunt. He's a warrior scholar studying for his doctorates in military science, right? Something like that.
History.
Military history. There we go. Close enough. But always brings a great perspective to the chat. Chad, thanks for jumping on tonight, brother.
Appreciate you.
All right. Our last panel, unless we get another guy to jump on tonight, is going to be my good buddy Bruce. Bruce at Camp Armament. That is his YouTube channel. That is his Instagram handle. Make sure you check him out. Bruce is essentially my right-hand man. You see him on a lot of videos, including the MacV SOG video we just uploaded. That's out there, you guys. If you haven't seen that, you need to see it because it's freaking a beast of a production that we put on. And as always, has an outstanding intro. So Bruce always brings that excellent civilian perspective that a lot of us are lacking. And he's got a lot of training and tactics and firearms. And Bruce was a aircraft mechanic. And like I said, make sure you check out his own YouTube channel and Instagram page. But Bruce, thanks for jumping on tonight, man. All right, guys, that is our panel tonight. And as always, I'm going to kick it over to our starting pitcher, Les, to pick it up with our topic tonight. So you got the con, brother.
All right. Well, recently the Pope said World War III has already started. Donald Trump the other day said it was just around the corner. And the other night, Brandon was rambling on something about Armageddon or something, or maybe the milk was spoiled in the kitchen. I'm not sure. It was kind of hard to follow. But it's a unique and interesting historical parallel right now, because one of the things is people still argue to this day, when did World War II start? Did it start when the Japanese invaded Manchuria in 1933? Or was it when they invaded mainland China in 1937? Or was it the Winter War in early 1939? Or was it actually only when Germany crossed into Poland? So we can't even decide when that war started. So do we know if this one's already started or is about to start, or is it going to kick off soon? Great question. That's what we're here to talk about tonight.
All right. So I think we're in a time where conditions for a third world war are there. However, I'm somewhat pessimistic about it actually going through. I don't think anyone in power, including Putin, wants to instigate it. I'm not sure Putin wants to be that guy who started World War III. What would be the point of using nukes in Ukraine? Putin seems to be doing just fine, implementing his strategy of destroy it all with artillery, airstrikes, and conventional missiles. That being said, I could see the Russians using chemical weapons or biological weapons long before using nukes. I think the more important aspect here is the response from the West. All I found in search after search of news articles is Biden condemns, NATO condemns, UN condemns. There's no stronger response. Why? Well, first of all, Biden and his administration they're all pansies. This is the same guy who voted against going into Pakistan and taking out Osama bin Laden. He has literally been on the wrong side of every major national security decision. Secondly, we are under no obligations to protect Ukraine. We have no defense treaties with them. Much of our assistance has been providing weaponry and monetary aid. That's it. Even if Russia uses low-yield tactical nukes, I'm not sure our response will be sufficient to cease aggression. Especially not with our pansy-ass commander-in-chief. I also think it's a little too convenient that Biden is pushing this World War III crap right before the midterms. I think it's a combination of using fear to help his party stay in power and the fact he doesn't even know where he is half the time. So that's where I stand, looking forward to the discussion.
Well, I've got to agree with everything that Chad just said. He pretty much so has clearly been looking on my notes, and it's just copying my thoughts, and was the first to the goal line with them. But listen, I'm sure we're going to get a lot deeper into this. There's a whole lot to discuss, but I do. Nukes, nuclear war, World War III. I don't think so. I think what we've got is a continuation of the same. I mean, we're not involved over there, like Chad said. We're just supplying weapons, material. We have some advisors over there, but that's nothing special. I guess some could say it's a bit reminiscent of Vietnam getting hotter and hotter, and eventually we get involved. But short of Russia doing something really stupid and possibly accidental, and hitting a NATO country and bringing NATO into it that way, or a NATO building, or doing something in the U.S. with the Navy. I just see it being accidental. If anything, I don't see us getting involved there. I don't think that Biden really wants us involved there. I think he's just fear mongering again, for, like Chad said, to try to get votes. You've got the midterms right around the way. His ratings and polls have him just absolutely in the tank right now. So I don't see anything kicking off, anything being necessarily not nuclear anyway. We absolutely have the capability to expand our conventional involvement a tremendous amount. I don't know why people think that we're kind of doing all that we can do. There's so much more that we can do. There's so much more that we and NATO can expand over there before we ever even get involved with our own troops. So I would expect to see that happen before we get anywhere close to World War III. So it makes for a cool story. And, it makes for great clickbait headlines. I see a whole lot of people talking about it, but I don't think that it's something that we're realistically close to. But as always, I reserve the right to come back next week and say I was wrong.
All right. So my personal opinion is I don't think World War III is going to break out. But then again, I was wrong about the Russians invading Ukraine. So I think most of us are wrong about that. I think a lot of things have happened that have put us in a very weak, as a country, United States, a weak position. And although I don't want World War III to break out, I think probably right now is the apex of us being at our most vulnerable. And why do I say that? Well, we sold out our Afghan allies. We essentially left them to fall to the enemy there. After 20 years of commitment. China is on the rise. North Korea is firing freaking ballistic missiles near Japan. The Russians invaded Ukraine without giving two shits what we had to think about it. And on the heels of the Afghanistan withdrawal, I don't think, military recruitment numbers are tanked. They're suffering there. So right now, I think we're looking at a post-Vietnam U.S. military, and is in dire need of a rebuilding. And so although I don't want a World War III to take place, nor do I think it's likely going to happen, I do think the environment right now is not a good position for us. And when you're in that kind of position, I think it sets it up for a greater possibility of something like a World War III transpiring. So let's open it up to the floor to see what the guys have.
Yeah, well, I would say whether World War III is going to kick off or not, now is the time to build our armed forces, either for the philosophy of if you want peace, prepare for war, or war's coming, you better be ready. World War II sets a major precedence here, especially in shipbuilding. All the aircraft carriers that went on to win the war were planned before the war started. We had our initial ones that were there, and we lost most of those pretty quickly. But all your Essex class carriers, they were approved to be built before Pearl Harbor was ever bombed. All same with all the battleships. The Iowa class that didn't get into the war till the last year, basically, all approved and started building before the war started at Pearl Harbor, for the Americans anyways. So you have to build now. You can raise an army fairly quickly. You can train troops to a decent level in a matter of months. You can't build ships fast. So it's time to start building. And if you're going to focus on something, it needs to be the fleet. I think a good example is the 1950s, where the Strategic Air Command alone was 50% of the defense budget. Well, in 2023, 50% of the defense budget needs to be shipbuilding, because we not only do we not have enough numbers active, we don't have a reserve fleet anymore worth speaking of. So if war's coming, or we're going to prepare for war so we don't have one, either way, we need to build ships and build a lot of them and build them now.
Hey, on that list, so I saw a news article. I was trying to pull it up before you finished speaking, but I wasn't able to, but I will find it. But the Navy wants to scrap a lot of U.S. LPD. I don't know if they're LPDs, but they're similar amphibious ships that, Marines need for the littoral, concept and everything else. And I'm seeing that the Navy wants to scrap those. And I think it's Congress is fighting to keep them or whatnot. But, it's all I've heard about is the potential for war with China is going to heavily involve taking islands in the South China Sea and in that Pacific, and, here we got the Navy talking about scrapping these ships that are going to be vital, in my opinion. I mean, it doesn't sound like we're on the right foot.
No, we're not. And literally in this entire century, since 2000, the decisions the Navy has made with ships, both on active duty and the ones they put in the reserve fleet, have made no sense whatsoever. A troop ship can last forever in many respects because it just has to haul troops. It doesn't need to be state-of-the-art modern technology like, say, an air defense ship or an anti-submarine ship, or definitely an aircraft carrier. So yeah, the Whidbey Island class is worn out. That class of ships was coming online just as I entered the Marine Corps back in 1987. So yeah, they're at the end of their service lives. But why we can't keep those ships in the reserve fleet, and why we're not replacing them with another fairly low-cost amphibious ship. The San Antonio class is a great class of ship. It's also like a freaking Corvette. It's expensive as hell. And why we can't have some low-cost amphibious ships, because that's what we used to do. The original Iwo Jima class was built on merchant hulls to keep costs down, and we did a lot of converting of World War II aircraft carriers to provide amphibious ships. Hell, during the Second World War, old World War I destroyers were turned into troop ships. So keeping the amphibious fleet up would be a fairly easy thing to do that the Navy seems to have no desire to do, basically.
How about the other other aspect that, we've provided Ukraine with so many like HIMARS and artillery and, Javelin and all this other capabilities. We've just been like pulling from the U.S. military to provide that stuff to them. And I'm not entirely confident that there's enough munitions in our stockpiles right now to wage war. I think we sent a lot over there, a lot more than probably has been getting reported.
That is another historical thing we do as a nation. If you look at the First and Second World Wars, we started them in the exact same position. We were coming up with substitute standards all over the place. And to show you how bad it was, look at your Marine Corps history of World War II. You can find photos as late as the middle of 1944 where you have Marines assaulting various islands, still carrying O3 Springfields, still using Rising submachine guns, still using the old model BARs and original 1928 Thompsons, because the Army was getting priority on everything because there just weren't that many rifles and Garands to go around. So it looks like we're heading for the same situation. And just back then in the 30s, we were proliferately giving things away. Things like the 1917 Enfield rifle, which there were 3 times as many of those as there were O3 Springfields. We gave them away around the world instead of keeping them for ourselves. Same with our machine guns and a lot of our ships. We gave a lot of ships away when we really needed them.
Yeah, that's sort of that's a good point, Les. That's sort of something we see that the U.S. likes to do is destroy and recycle its old stuff rather than mothball it for a rainy day. And the argument is always, well, this stuff's outdated, and we won't be going back to that, and that may be true. But that's great stuff to give away in a case like this, rather than giving away our very best stuff and taking a chance of running in short supply on it. I think one thing that maybe ties into all this, and I notice a couple of people in chat have mentioned it too, where there's always the guy that says, follow the money. Well, as long as we have the capability of replacing it with, more new stuff, I think that's fine. And that's something that helps bolster the economy. It creates jobs, albeit socialist jobs, just through getting rid of stuff that the government already has and then having to create it all anew again. But there seems to be, as a taxpayer, and I realize this, an endless supply of taxpayer money to be able to fund that stuff. So we'll just take the javelins that are being sent over there. We'll just use them for example. Or we could look at artillery. It doesn't matter. As long as there's lots of people working, building new artillery and building new javelins over here, well, that's not so much of a problem. But if they're not being replaced as fast as they're going out, yeah, that's going to be, that's for certainly an issue that we're going to have to address, or we'll find ourselves a little light-footed in the whole thing.
And to that point, I just read an article yesterday that they're getting ready to restart the 777 assembly lines for the 777 howitzer, and I would imagine they'll probably start cranking up the Javelin thing. I can't imagine that they wouldn't, simply because that weapon system in particular has been so damn effective.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Go ahead,
I'm surprised we split them M777s. Like, I would have thought that there was going to be like massive stockpiles of M19 or 8s, because I mean that's what we used at the beginning of the GWAT. And I mean, were those all sold off to Israel or something? Like, where the hell did those go? Like, I would have thought that the Ukrainians would have been getting those, weapon systems instead of, latest and greatest M777s.
That's one of the weird things we do as a nation that makes no sense. If you go back to the 1990s when Clinton started his drawdown, at that time it was in the National Guard, and one of the things we were wondering about was, where was all the gear? Because the Army went from 18 active divisions to 10. The Army Reserve eliminated 3 combat divisions. The National Guard has eliminated 2. You had a freaking dozen divisions worth of gear, and it just seemed to all disappear. Because our thing was like, we should be awash in gear down there after that point, and we never were. Like in my company, the National Guard, we had 1 radio, and it was a PRC-25. Didn't work, but it didn't matter. You only had 1. There was no one to talk to. Hence why when we go to One Shepherd, I'm such a great fan of the TA-1. But it's something consistent in our history, because you find out we're always the gear just disappears at a certain point. It did after World War I. It did after Korea. Because if you look in the fighting early pictures of Vietnam, 1965, everybody's wearing practically World War II web gear and everything. And then all of a sudden, it's right about early 67, the new stuff starts coming in. And that kind of indicates the government went on a crash program to make it.
Yeah. I'm not too attuned to the logistics of this war. But I got the Department of State website pulled up, and it actually lists everything that we've given Ukraine. And starting from the top of the screen, scroll down a little bit, you can see we've given them quite a bit. Not to mention security assistance, monetary aid, things like that. But I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit here. Going back to the war itself, let's take a look at recent events. Most recently, we've seen tempers flare after the strike on the Kerch Strait Bridge in Crimea. I think this probably surprised Putin, and now he's kind of throwing a fit because, well, I mean, let's be honest, it didn't paint him in a good light. We've yet to see the Ukrainians indulge in large-scale terrorism within Russia like the Chechens did. With perhaps a single exception, it was reported that the Ukrainian government was behind a car bomb that killed the daughter of a prominent Russian nationalist. But I think terrorism might be the next step in this, not necessarily nuclear war. We've got massive protests going on in Russia. Most recent article, there's a famous rapper in Russia who's now declared to be a foreign agent, even though he's a Russian citizen. Had a journalist. The story behind this lady is pretty interesting. She actually went on live television and said, don't believe the propaganda. They're lying to you. This is Russian state television. What is going on in Ukraine is now a crime, and Russia is the aggressor. The responsibility for this aggression lies with only one person, and that person is Vladimir Putin. This mobilization that's been going on, you've had a mass exodus of Russian citizens leaving the country. Putin himself claimed that this mobilization was handled poorly. And then, finally, you got these conscripts that are living in, poor conditions. So I want to shift somewhat and kind of look at this politically, like kind of big picture. And right now, the Russian army is so desperate, they're activating reserves. And now we see anti-war protests in Moscow. This goes back to what I've been saying about totalitarian regimes. They fight a two-front war. Now Putin has threats to his leadership on the home front from his own people. His actions, stink of desperation. It's gotten so bad in Russia that they're attempting to conscript people from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan who hold Russian citizenship, while threatening them that failure to comply will result in loss of said citizenship for the conscript and the conscript's family. So, this turmoil in Russia could be used as a coup, as a foundation for a coup in Moscow. If, for example, one of Putin's generals or cabinet members saw an opportunity to grab power under Putin's popularity, that may happen. So I'm just going to throw that out there and maybe get your guys' comments on that.
All valid points there, Chad. If you're going to call up your conscripts who don't want to go and then treat them like shit, you're not going to get great battlefield results. It is also interesting that it tells you the propaganda is not working, that he's having to resort to just out and out conscription at this stage of the war. He's on the offensive. He should have no problem with this. It should be the Ukrainians grabbing every swinging dick that can man a rifle to go to the front lines. And it seems to be reversed now.
Yeah, it's easy to, it's interesting to see this all unfold. You think of Russia having unlimited manpower. You think of the human waves of World War II, for example. And I've seen quite a few quite a few opinions, I guess we could say, on how Russia's sort of conducting the war. And it seems like that they're just behind in the times on their doctrine. And I'm starting to believe, strangely, that that's somewhat true. I got a buddy who's somewhat pro-Russian, maybe more for ideological issues than anything. And he was trying to make the comment that that Putin's under obviously a tremendous amount of pressure. Yes, one, you've got a lot of people in Russia who don't want anything to do with war. That's certainly true. But his point was that about 20% of Russia is very pro-war, very pro-Russian, very nationalist. And I said, well, that can't possibly be true. I said, if that was true, then you would have an unlimited supply of fighting age males lining up to join the Russian military and head off to Ukraine. That's clearly not happening. We've got units on the front that are surrendering en masse, units on the fronts abandoning their vehicles and retreating en masse. We've got entire units over there being wiped out, and they're replacing them with conscripts. It's only going to get worse for them, not better. How good are those conscripts going to fight? How hard are those conscripts going to work? How motivated are people going to be when their families and their citizenship are under threat? That's just not how it works. And I think that's a huge problem for Russia. I don't know where they're going to go from here, but I don't see it getting better. And Chad, the fact that you pointed out that you've got what's essentially state TV now under the threat of suspension and arrest are going out and saying anti-Russian, making anti-governmental statements. Then that tells you that morale in Russia is dropping as a whole, and that people don't care. they're going to go out and protest anyway. And so that's going to create a problem for Putin on his own front that he's going to have to deal with, in addition to having to try to focus on the war in Ukraine. So I just see this becoming more and more problematic for Russia, and maybe more and more in favor of Ukraine. So we'll have to wait and see what goes on with that. But I'm not. I've been very disappointed in what I've seen from Russia so far. I'm sure everyone has. And this is a new kind of war. I mean, I think one thing that I want to point out a little bit off topic too, that I'm quite fascinated with, and I got into this when that Buk anti-aircraft vehicle was sent down from Russia that ended up shooting down, I believe it was I may be wrong, a Malaysian airliner, but a civilian airliner anyway. This was before this kicked off. Immediately, everyone knew exactly where that was from. There was cell phone footage of that thing being loaded up, put on a train, driven, taken on a train to these different Russian cities. You have all the photos from soldiers and text messages of what's going on, all the way down to where it ends up. It ends up in eastern Ukraine, and then you've got the radio communications of the pro-Russian commander on the ground, literally radioing back and forth, talking about shooting down this Ukrainian airliner, right? And it was all out in just almost no time. And where I'm going with this is I saw a similar video today where they were talking about a Russian Siberian unit. Apparently, Russia has 2 tank battalions that are trained in Siberian warfare, and they're primarily armed with the T80. The T80 has a turbine engine, works really well in the cold, okay? Makes sense. And they brought one of those down in the initial attack on Kyiv, and it was pretty much so destroyed. But this guy, and we're not talking about the government now, we're talking about an individual, small individual organization, had tracked those vehicles where their markings were repainted, the old markings, showing them being brought down on trains. And all this had been done through cell phone footage and that had been uploaded to like TikTok by people who were just like, oh, cool, look at the military train going by. Oh, there's so many cars. Look at all these tanks. Well, then that information is out there for everybody to see. So where I'm going with this is not the war of World War II, where you could move some units around secretly and launch some type of secret attack and surprise the enemy. When big Russian units are being moved around, Russia doesn't seem to have a grasp on this information that's coming out of everyone's cell phones, and it's being floated out there, and we're able to follow where those units are going up until this point. I don't think that the Ukraine or NATO or the United States has been surprised by any Soviet Union or any Soviet unit that showed up in Ukraine to this point.
Yeah, with the World War II comparison, I also think it's not comparable because Russia was engaged in total war during the Second World War. They're not fighting for survival like Ukraine is. They're fighting for their leader's ego. So that lies another problem. And going into the bigger picture of this conversation, if Putin were to use nukes, if he's unpopular now, think how unpopular he would be if he actually used nuclear weapons with his own people.
I think another thing that's relevant here too is General Zhukov during the Second World War was famous for saying it takes a very brave man to be a coward in the Red Army. That kind of tells you the Russian army has never been that motivated a force. What it mainly tells you is whatever the modern version of the NKVD is, doesn't do his job as well as the NKVD did during the Second World War. Because the Russian troops tended to be more afraid of what was behind them instead of the Germans in front of them. That's clearly not the case anymore. But I think it just shows the historical nature of the Russian army. It's not an army that's particularly performed overly well in its history. You know, it did have early successes, especially at Tannenbaum in the First World War, but then it was one of the first armies to bog down into the trenches. And then it was the first army out of the war due to turmoils at home. Second World War, it gives up a lot of ground till the gates of Moscow and into the city of Stalingrad. And then it's, you know, a very slow grind back to the west against an army that it was massively outnumbered in men and materiel. So it's not an army that particularly performs well unless it has overwhelming superiority against a particular enemy. which
Yeah,
goes a long way to explain why the Ukrainians have been able to get such outsized effects from what little bit of their air force is left, or what few HIMARS that they have, that they're getting all kinds of gain out of using those weapon systems, all out of proportion to their numbers.
yeah, I think there's no question the Russians aren't performing to everybody's expectations, right? So when they launched their invasion, like nobody can argue the fact that they achieved their tactical objectives. There's no way. There's absolutely no way. And now you even have the Ukrainians on the offensive there. But what I fear is with the annexation of those territories, now Putin's essentially claiming that those are part of Russia. Those are Russia motherland, right? So now Ukrainians are trying to take their former or their territories back. And Putin's saying, well, this is Russian homeland. You're invading Russia at this point. And then just escalates from there. And then that all snowballs, and then we find ourselves in potentially a third world war. And again, I want to remind everybody that Putin and the Chinese freaking leader Ping, ZZ Ping, however the hell you pronounce his name, they had that meeting at the Olympics, right? Z and Putin, nobody knows what the hell that they were discussing, but this was all right before Russia invaded Ukraine. So who knows what was all outlined in that plan. I do find it interesting that all this stuff is going on. You got the Iranians stepping up their nuclear production. You got the North Koreans acting up against launching missiles towards Japan. You got the growing intensity of the conflict in Ukraine. China's obviously ramped up, its saber rattling with Taiwan. It just seems like everything's kind of coming to culmination here. And we're in a very dangerous time, at a time where we have depleted much of our stockpiles to back the Ukrainians in that part of the world, at a time where we abandoned our allies in Afghanistan, left, millions of dollars of equipment for the Afghan army, which capitulated to the enemy. And at a time where the military is being cut back by the current administration. Here's the article I was trying to reference earlier. The Navy wants to decommission, some of these warships that are used to transport Marines. Well, like I said, the whole time, Force Design 2030 has been designed around taking these islands and repelling the enemy's, capabilities. And those Marines have to get to those islands. So it's like, what the hell's going on? Like, again, I'm not thinking that World War III is going to kick off. I think cooler heads will hopefully prevail. But we were wrong on Russia going into Ukraine. And all this shit is adding up. And it only takes one little trigger. And next thing you know, we're in a third world war. We're kind of narrowly focusing in on the conflict in Ukraine, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. We're talking about North Koreans, go into freaking Ukraine. Like, what did that ever come to fruition?
I don't
like,
think it ever happened. But it's an interesting thing that sooner or later Putin's going to take that offer. I mean, 100,000 troops is nothing to sneeze at. He's got no real reason to say no. And let's be honest, to shed off 100,000 people, hey, freaking right. Kim Jong-un would probably be happy to do that. He's like, keep them. They're not coming back.
But so that you have that aspect. You also have the aspect of Iranian drones going to Russia to aid them in their Ukrainian conflict. You have Chinese have been supplying the Russians with war material for their war effort. And, you're seeing like an axis of evil forming, and the situation is developing here.
Yeah, it is. That's why I go back to, like, we really need to build the fleet. And you're right to question the loss of those Gator freighters. I mean, those LPDs or LSDs are really old, and they're definitely ready for a refit. But an amphibious ship is not like a combatant ship in the fact that it doesn't need the most modern shipment systems. What do you need the ability to do? Place for the Marines to lay down, way to feed them chow. Ship doesn't need much more than that. And the British proved that very effectively down in the Falklands by converting a cruise ship into a troop ship. It was absolutely critical to what they did. Yeah, does World War III have to be nuclear? No, doesn't really. But at the same token, I can't imagine it not going nuclear.
Yeah, and here's the other thing I've got with that. The whole escalation is, you know, you can think of it on a personal level, or you can think about it as nations, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to threaten what you're going to do next. Is it that you see what I'm saying? Like if I'm going to escalate the war and launch an attack of some sort, I'm not going to broadcast that before I do it. I'm just going to do it. And the fact that Putin keeps kind of hinting around nukes and keeps hinting around threatening NATO is like, what's the purpose of that? Like, dude, if you're going to do it, freaking do it. If you're going to jump. But running your mouth about it here for months, it really it does appear to be that it's a fake threat. You know, I know he just came out just a couple of weeks ago and mentioned it and said, you know, I'm serious this time. What, you weren't serious last time? Why can't you be serious all the time? You're freaking Vladimir Putin. You're the leader of Russia. I didn't think you guys had a sense of humor. Be serious all the time, right? I mean, get after it. So I don't think I think when you threaten someone with some kind of violence, that you're hoping that threat works, and you haven't thought through whether you're actually going to use that violence or not. Again, could be wrong, right around the corner, but I just don't see us anywhere near that level of escalation yet. And part of that's because of what Russia has shown to us so far. There was an earlier comment that was like, hey, you're taking Russia too lightly. What do you think they are? Yeah. We didn't take Russia lightly back in December and back in January. We're taking Russia lightly now because we're frankly disappointed in their performance. Not that we're pro-Russian, but that you expect that a military of that level with that much experience in war would have rolled through Ukraine a long time ago. And we would probably be talking right now about whether parts of Poland are about to be annexed by Russia because they found a village of people in Poland that speak Russia. But we're not there. Russia hasn't really gained anything more in a substantial level than it had than it had in February. And what's going on with that? So it's not that anybody's taking Russia lightly for the sake of taking them lightly. We're taking them lightly because we're disappointed in them, and that's based on their performance thus far. I saw a thing where, and this keeps popping up, but it seems to be true, where Russia's sort of complaining, well, we're greatly outnumbered. How the hell are you greatly outnumbered? You don't have enough troops to put on the line to outnumber the Ukrainian troops? What's going on over there? Who's doing the numbers on this whole thing? Just doesn't add up to me. It's just, I keep waiting on them to pull some magic military encirclement out of their pocket, and they keep failing to do so and keep losing territory, saying that they're regrouping. Well, they're almost at the point of regrouping inside Russia now, and they're complaining that Russian cities are getting shelled and Russian airfields. Well, how is that even possible? Get it together, Anyway, I could rant on about this forever, but I've just not been impressed. I've just not been impressed with their military. I've been disappointed. That's all.
Well, Bruce, those are all great points, because let's look at a big point of what's happened on the battlefield right now. Russia's essentially lost a naval war to a country that has no ships. They've had the only, that I can tell, failure of an airborne air mobile operation, the Assault on Hostomel airfield at the beginning of the conflict. It's for only failure I can see since Operation Market Garden. That's not going well. They were supposed to be these great masters of armored warfare, and yet we're not seeing large armored force-on-force battles. They're just not occurring, and from all the video that we're seeing, granted it's being sanitized and everything, but all I'm seeing is a lot of destroyed Russian armor, not seeing a whole lot of destroyed Ukrainian armor. What we're hearing is like half the tanks in the Ukrainian army now are captured Russian tanks. I mean, we keep hearing about the Germans are going to send them some Leopard 1s eventually, but they clearly haven't gotten there yet. So that the armored force isn't performing, and the Soviet Air Force holy shit, talk about somebody who's not performing. I mean, maybe I'm just looking at it the American style of war, but my God, I mean, just the Air Force is just not even there. It's like they're not even playing the game.
Yeah, excellent point, Bruce. I think you're spot on. I also think you can extend that to a place like North Korea. I think Kim is perfectly content to sit within his borders in his high up position because he knows that war would destabilize the country. I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with politics in North Korea, but there recently a middle class has risen up in Pyongyang. They have cell phones now. They have cars now. They have all this stuff now. So he's got to keep all these people happy. So I think these missile launches seem to be more for political propaganda than they are to try to bend Western political will.
Great point.
Yeah, I look at these the Russian tanks and armor that's being misused, I guess I should say. But I want to kind of get back because I had a point I wanted to make about some things we were talking about earlier about us sending javelins and artillery and some of our top of the line or better considered top tier equipment over there and taking and knocking out those tanks. And I think that the reason that we're doing that is that this is a great test bed, right? We're not losing any Americans in this thing. Okay. So they're not our lives. Okay. We got Ukrainians willing to use them and we've got Russians willing to line up against them. And we're able to see probably for the first time ever in real warfare exactly what our anti-tank defenses and our artillery will do directly against real Russian troops that are in an active war. And it's really their top of the line gear. Now, I know that Russia's got some more advanced tanks, but they have very few of them. And it seems like they're still in the experimental testing phase. So this is their top of the line stuff. And it's not holding up. You know, the whole idea, it was a neat theory of lowering the profile of a tank's frontal silhouette by storing the ammunition inside the turret. That probably looked great on paper and probably has for the last 40 years. But we're seeing now that it was a terrible idea because, man, from the top, those tanks, those are one-hit pops, man. They're like what do we used to call, you know, the old Sherman. I think was it the Ronsenal, you know, named after the lighter because it strikes every time when they were gasoline powered. Well, that's what's going on with the Russian tanks right now, man. They're lighting up every time. There's just tons of videos that you can watch where Ukrainian crews and or Russian crews are just dropping one grenade down in the turret. That entire tank, man, pops the top. That's all it takes. Once you get a high explosive light source, heat source going on inside that turret, boom, it's done and it's lost. And and one other thing to the point of the Ukrainians having a bunch of Russian tanks and to the Leopards list, yes, the Ukrainians seem to be very, very, very good at repairing Russian tanks. I know that they put out a video about it, basically giving a tour of one of their tank repair facilities, bragging about it, and the Russians hit it not too much later after that. But it's interesting that the Russians were finding out where this tank repair facility was through news articles and social media rather than knowing because they had somebody on the inside to figure it out. But they are doing a good job of repairing those tanks. And to the point of Leopards, it seems like the Ukrainians are saying, we don't want the Leopards. The Ukrainians are saying, we want more T-72s. Poland, anybody that has them, send us top of the line T-72s because our crews are already trained on them. And our crews can go from one tank to another. It's easy to train. And that at the end of the day, maybe the Leopard's a better tank than the T-72, but not if we have to spend 3 months training a crew to operate it and 5 or 6 months training a repair facility to work on it. That's back to the logistical side, right? Just send us the T-72s. We're already spun up and we're ready to go. So it seems like that's what's going on there.
No, that's a valid point. That's why, like, from 1918 all the way up till the 1950s, essentially, the Finns went with the Mosin Nagant. I mean, the Mosin Nagant was never the greatest bolt action out there ever, but they were plentiful and they kind of knew where their ammo source was coming from. So, you know, it was good enough. And, you know, I think you're right there, Bruce, that they're willing to go with good enough instead of waiting for perfection.
Yeah, I just want to comment because I remember if you go back and watch our older streams pre-Russian invasion, I remember talking about, your typical Russian soldier, because the stuff I was seeing prior to that was all in Syria, right? And obviously the Russians were sending their cream of the crop to Syria because those guys were outfitted in the latest and greatest gear. Every single one of them had MVGs, looked like decent comm equipment and, PECs on their weapons. But once that Russian invasion kicked off, what do we see? No MVGs, no PECs on their rifles. And I mean, it was like I was more well equipped in 2003 in the Iraq invasion than these guys that crossed the LOD into Ukraine. And I mean, I was mind blown. So, yeah. So I definitely, my perspective on the average Russian grunt in terms of how equipped they are and possibly how much training they receive has definitely been altered. So I don't think the Russians want a big ground war with any NATO nation for that matter. But again, you can't help but think that Ukraine, with everything that's going on, particularly now that Russia's annexing these regions and claiming it's part of Russia now, and it's the Ukrainians are launching counteroffensives into those regions. You can't help but think that that's a flashpoint, or could potentially be a flashpoint.
Oh, absolutely, it could be a flashpoint. And one of the reasons it makes nuclear war so much to worry about is the simple non-performance of the Russian conventional military, because it's going to come down to, hey, the nukes is all we got. Because we've just established the Russian military is not performing. And I think it's also an interesting corollary here too. All Bruce mentioned about these tanks brewing up, kind of just like they did for the Iraqis in Desert Storm. They didn't perform particularly well there, and everybody blamed that on the Iraqis. And it's like, maybe their stuff's just shit. And I think the Russians know that, yeah, they start going up against Abrams and Leopard 2 fire control systems, and the results are pretty much going to be the same.
I just want to comment because I saw somebody say that, Brent, they do have lasers on their AKs. And I'm telling you, go look at the actual helmet cameras of the airborne troops that launched the air assault into the airport I think it was in Kyiv. Like they tried to take a major airport. These are the cream of their crop. These are their airborne assault troops. Came in on Mi-28 helicopters, I believe. And none of those guys had freaking PECs on their rifles. So, I mean, I don't know where somebody could say like, oh, they got this is their fucking front lines, tip of the spear guys were hitting the deck. These were the ones going deep behind enemy lines, and they did not have PECs on their weapons, any type of IR lasers or any of that shit. So
let's put this myth to bed real quick. We always heard during the Arab-Israeli wars, because the Israelis could take converted Shermans and British Centurions and make short work of modern Soviet armor. We always heard, oh, they were the monkey models, the export models. They're nowhere as good as the stuff the Russians keep for themselves. We heard that in Desert Storm, and we heard that everywhere. Yet supposedly you assume the Russians will be using their decent stuff now, and it's not performing any better than the monkey models that we always heard about. Maybe just Russian equipment just isn't that good.
Yeah, and again, for those in chat, that are making all the accusations at us and me of, being the mainstream media guy or whatever, that's okay. But look, if it's not, then show us. I'm like Missouri. Show me. Where's it at? I mean, I'm really I believe what the Russian and ex-Soviet propaganda was myself, that, yeah, they were holding out, that, yeah, Iraq had the third largest military at the time, and we just freaking absolutely rolled them. And the excuse was, but their stuff they couldn't get the best stuff from Russia. They can't get the best stuff from Russia. And now some of you guys seem to be saying that the Russians can't get the best stuff from Russia. What the heck, man? I mean, if what's the point of going to war if you don't send your best stuff out? I think that the United States, at least I can speak for the United States, don't we always send our best stuff out? I mean, we lost an what was it, 114? Don't get me lying. Stealth fighter over freaking Yugoslavia, over Serbia. So come on, man. We've got our best stuff out there every single time. What's Russia holding out for? Maybe they are, guys. Hey, maybe they are. All I'm saying is, as I'm looking at a map and I'm looking at the progression that Russia has made towards their goals ever since this conflict started, and I'm wondering, like, what the heck is going on over there? I think it is important, though, that to look at the pressure that's probably on Putin, and I think that's what a lot of people are sort of worried about, that this pressure will end up causing him to do something irrational even for Vladimir Putin, because he's got a failing military on one side. We can see this by the generals that he's moving around and the command that he's moving around. You don't move a bunch of people around in your organization if you're very happy with their performance. All right. You get a new football coach when your team's sucking. You get a new quarterback when your quarterback sucks. That's what's going on over there. And at the same time, it's clear that the people of Russia, or at least there's a percentage of them that are not happy with what's going on with their involvement in Ukraine. And that percentage is growing. So that's an internal pressure that he's feeling.
Here, this is the video I'm talking about. These are their freaking dudes that are assaulting the airport near Kyiv. And just regular AK-74s. I think they have some like EOTech sights that are similar on them. And that's about it. So.
Yeah, I don't think this operation was well planned. I think it was all thrown together. Everything seems last minute, and now we're at a point of desperation. Putin, to me, seems to be making the same mistake we made in Vietnam, where he thinks, throwing manpower and bombing the shit out of the country is going to have an effect to break the will of the Ukrainian people to fight. It's really had the opposite effect.
And that's funny because, that's what we thought in the Second World War. Bomber Harris and the rest of them thought you could bomb people and break their will, and it never works. It didn't work in the Battle of Britain. It didn't break the Germans either. Matter of fact, I don't know any case where strategic bombing has broken anybody's will. Definitely didn't hurt the Vietnamese in that respect.
That, and I agree with that, and that's why I'm surprised at this sort of recent set of attacks from Russia when the bridge was attacked. That's the sinking of the Moscow. That's a huge embarrassment. Attacking this bridge, that's a huge embarrassment. Putin has went on the record talking about how awesome this bridge is and how it's a symbolism of the Russian people. So it's literally the equivalent of someone just open-handed slapping him in the face, right? But then to retaliate against civilian targets, that's not going to accomplish anything for him. He should know by now that attacking civilian targets, that doesn't cause the resolve of the Ukrainian people to flounder at all. If nothing, it just makes them that much more strongly against the war and so much more strongly against Russia. So I'm not sure what he's thinking there. I think he should be focusing a lot more on military targets, and even when he's targeting infrastructure, things like power. I mean, that people don't seem to be, the people that are still there, that are still in Ukraine, they're holding out. They're not worried about whether they have power or not. So I just think it's the wrong approach for him to make. And I'm not sure why he's not attacking more military targets and making ground that way. He's complaining about being outnumbered. We'll start shoring up those numbers.
Well, one of the things that terror bombing, for lack of better terminology, does have an effect. If you look during the second half of World War II, the V weapons, the V1, the V2 raining in London, the British held a lot of resources back. A lot of RAF units were held back in air defense. You had a lot of anti-aircraft crews. They were all manned at full strength to keep the home front safe. Granted, a lot of that anti-aircraft defense was Dad's army, but they put a lot of effort into it. And those were units, especially RAF units, that were not sent forward to the front. So yeah, there is an effect to it because the Ukrainians can't just let a city be bombed.
Like I said in my opening statement, I'm still waiting for this to divulge in terrorism like it did in Chechnya. I think that's the next step. Not nuclear war, but you're going to start seeing, possibly Ukrainian acts of terrorism in Russia and vice versa. So
I'm actually surprised we haven't already seen some of that, Chad, or a little bit more of that. I know that there's there's some talk from the Russian side that could have been somewhat what was involved in the bombing of the bridge, right, where possibly it was a truck bomb or something that went off. So this may be the sort of early stages of seeing that, or at least seeing it reported.
Well, the same token, both sides have no real good reason to publicize it. The Ukrainians don't want to publicize they're engaged in terrorism. That's not going to work well for them when they've got the whole world dumping aid on them. And the Russians aren't going to admit, oh, yeah, terrorism's working. Oh, yeah, they're tearing our ass up in our own country. They're not going to admit that. So, yeah, the reason you're not hearing about it is both sides have a lot of good reasons to not talk about it.
Well, let's kind of pivot here, because we've taken a deep dive into Ukraine, obviously, and I think we all agree that that's potential flashpoint. So, what devolves us into World War III? How does that kick off? What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, the easy low-hanging fruit is somebody popping a nuke. I think the way all the defense systems are about nukes, it's almost automated that if you pop a nuke pretty much outside eastern Ukraine, you're going to get a response from a lot of parties. And once people start nuking, it'll just be this big thing. It's not going to be, oh, we nuked them, they nuked us. It's not going to be like that. It'll be a whole lots of nukes, like submarines will empty their magazines kind of things. Everybody will shoot the missiles out of the holes in the ground because they know if they don't do it right away, the missiles won't be there. So yeah, I think if it goes nuclear, it's going to be very bad nuclear. It's not just going to be a small nuclear strike.
Do you think that's the only contingency, though? Nuclear?
Like I said, that's low-hanging fruit. I can see it devolving into a worldwide thing where people start choosing sides. I mean, right now, the obvious axis is Russia, China. Of course, they'll get the North Koreans and the Iranians and their client states. And then the West will coalesce around NATO, essentially. Matter of fact, it wouldn't surprise me, and I think it would be a good idea to see such nations as Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea join NATO.
Yeah, that's sort of my take too, Les. That I think that obviously I won't say that any type of nuclear intervention would even start off World War III. I think of smaller tactical nukes were used somewhere in eastern Ukraine. That may not provoke the West into getting involved on a level high enough to call it World War III. But what I do think we can see is the shelling, whether it's accidental or intentional, of any Western assets, for any NATO country. I think that would be that's probably the line in the sand. That's probably where you start getting troops on the ground and you start seeing a serious escalation. I mean, let's remember, I know there are a few exceptions with little secret stuff going on, but we don't have large conventional forces on the ground in Ukraine. When I say we, I mean NATO. Not a single country does. And so that's the type of escalation where you start seeing things moving its way into World War III. And then countries have to start deciding what side of history do they want to be on. They have to pick a side. And there's always a couple of countries that pick the wrong side as well. But we know Russia's on one side. And but it looks like Turkey's wishy-washy right now. There are other countries that are wishy-washy. I'm not sure what I think North Korea is just a spoiled child in the corner of the classroom making a bunch of racket trying to get some attention. They're not serious, but they're like, hey, we're the bad guys, not Putin. You're supposed to be talking about us. And they're like, we're over here. Let's just shoot a few missiles off and get us back on the news. We don't want people to forget that we're an actual country. So you got all that going on. But Chad, I do look forward to hearing your well thought out reply on this. But I think I don't think that escalating it to nuclear is even equals World War III. It could, but I don't think it necessarily does. Again, if this was only happening in eastern Ukraine, I don't know that we would be replying in any kind of way. We would step things up, but I don't think it would mean World War III.
Yeah, Bruce, I couldn't agree more. I think using tactical nukes in a country we have no treaties with is not going to move NATO in that direction. I think it would have to be a nuclear exchange between Russia and a NATO country for us to move on it. Again, we're talking tactical nukes, low yield nukes. I think Putin would be more apt to use chemical weapons. That might be a smarter move, or biological weapons. But nuclear weapons, low tactical nukes, I don't think that's going to move us into World War III. Brent, to answer your question, I don't know. I mean, I've been pondering this all day since this was our topic. Well, how's it going to start? I don't know. That's a hard one.
One possible scenario on the conventional side is that in a desperation move, Putin strikes a transportation hub on the NATO side of the line, and it's an effective strike. I think if he strikes at, say, Poznan, and okay, he damages a bridge and whatever, the engineers come up. Let's say he hits a depot and it's bad and it levels half a city because it's a big ammunition depot, takes out a bunch of critical equipment and everything. Yeah, that could start it. And it won't be like, oh, at that point, NATO goes at it, but it'll be escalatory, like, oh, you've done this heavy damage to Poznan. Well, the Poles will strike in there and start doing things, or maybe NATO nations will extend air coverage over Western Ukraine. It'll be ratcheting up tit for tat, things like that. And then all of a sudden, Putin goes out and sinks a ship in the North Atlantic kind of thing.
Well, I think for the most part, the Russians have been staying out of Western Ukraine. I mean, until this bridge incident occurred, then they actually attacked cities in Western Ukraine. But until then, they've been kind of staying far away from Poland as possible, so they don't make that mistake.
Oh yeah, that's similar to what we did during the Vietnam War. We had that buffer right up by the Chinese border, so we couldn't accidentally bomb China. Same thing.
That's a good point, Chad. And Les, to your comment on the naval side, yes, a naval incident, which is completely outside the border of, we'll say, any NATO borders or Ukrainian borders, that could certainly provoke a serious response, because each ship is essentially a sovereign land of a country. Okay, and I'm dumbing this down, but you attack a NATO ship. We can go back and think sort of like the sinking of the Lusitania, for example, if you're looking at military history. But you attack a NATO ship, whether it's military or commercial, and it's intentional or not, does not matter. That will initiate a response.
Oh, and there's historical precedent. You mentioned the Lusitania and stuff. The Maine before that was an accident, and we thought, and look what we did to Spain over an accident. Pearl Harbor, look what happened to Japan.
And Vietnam, Les, whether it was real or we created it, the point was, oops, one of our ships was under attack. Now we have justification to go to war.
Yeah. Sinking a United States ship is never a good idea. There's just historical precedent all the way back to the War of 1812 on that.
Well, I do want to go back to one of the questions that one of the commenters posed, and that is, can we have a non-nuclear World War III? And my take on that is, it would be very iffy. But I think if there's, for instance, if you have buffer countries, right, and I'm talking like Taiwan, Ukraine, countries that are being fought over, but there's no direct threat of mainland being invaded. For instance, if we go to war with China over Taiwan, China knows that there's not going to be U.S. Marines hitting the beach of mainland China. We have no intention of occupying mainland China. If a war were to break out between our two countries, it would specifically be over defending Taiwan. So in this situation, you have two nuclear armed countries that I don't think a war, it could be wrong, but I don't think a war would devolve to nuclear onslaught, because China knows that if they launch nukes, we launch nukes, and then that's just fucking over, right? But I think a two nuclear armed countries could go to war with each other and not devolve into nuclear weapons if you have something like a Taiwan or a Ukraine that's being fought over, and both sides know that mainland is not going to be invaded by the opposing side. That's the only scenario I can think of where you could have a conflict between two nuclear armed nations that doesn't devolve into a nuclear war.
Well, we had this occur all throughout the Cold War. These proxy wars we fought throughout the entire Cold War. It's going to continue to be the trend between nuclear powers. We just cannot afford to go to war, like all out full conventional war with China. It has to be a proxy war. It has to be, okay, they're going to fight the Taiwanese, but we're going to give them weapons and stuff like that. You know, it's going to continue to be that way. It's been that way since 1945, and I don't see it ending anytime soon.
Agreed. Absolutely, Chad.
I agree, Chad. You know, we tried that in Vietnam and we failed. But as long as we can supply, I think for us, for the United States, the winning position, or I say the position without any major losses, is we can take financial losses, right? Like we can send unlimited gear and equipment and support, training, information over to, say, Ukraine or to any battlefield, Taiwan for that matter, and not bat an eye. No one misses a day of work. No one loses a night of sleep. No one's cell phones quit working so they can't get on TikTok. Life is good in America. But when the American bodies start coming home, our window for victory is very small. As long as we're just sending money over their equipment and using someone else's lives to use it, I think that I don't know what the window for that is, but it's very, very broad. And let's face it, this goes right back to what we were saying before. It seems to be working. It seems to be containing Russia for sure. And we have the capability to expand it tremendously. There's tremendous things we can do in Ukraine before we start putting any troops on the ground. So there's still a lot of room for us to expand equipment that we can give them and technology we can give them. There's plenty of room for growth there before we're ever, as Americans, threatened in any kind of serious way.
No, good point. That goes to the point I made in past live streams. You know, the United States can be the arsenal of democracy again. You know, and as Brent once said, it's nice to have an ally that fights now. You know, the Ukrainians seem more than willing to fight, and they just need to be armed to do so. Much like the Israelis did back in the 60s and 70s, you know, give them what they need, they're more than willing to do the job. And just like the Israelis, at some point, we will have to give the Ukrainians F-16s, and we'll have to give them probably our older F-15s and things like that, not out of just sheer logistics, because we're going to run out of Russian-made crap. The spares will go away. There's just not that many nations out there still using a lot of Soviet-made junk. So, yeah, eventually they'll get our stuff. And, you know, if the war turns out to be a protracted conflict, there will be time to train those Leopard crews. There will be time to train those F-16, because then you're just converting a trained fighter pilot to use a different plane. That's a much quicker process than it is to training from scratch.
I also think the kind of the wars of the future between superpowers is probably also going to be largely economic. And I think we're kind of seeing that with the Russia-Saudi agreement that's been going on recently, that OPEC's going to cut oil production, and it's got the full support of Russia. So I think the hybrid warfare approach that Russia became popular for back in 2014, they're kind of employing that now. So, you know, that's another aspect of it. You have the economic warfare side of it as well.
Yeah, to Luke's comment, Luke, you let them try. You want an American behind every blade of grass of a rifle? You fuck with these. You want to piss off every American and get them again? You shut this down for a day. You watch this country melt, okay? You'll have every soy boy and every commie state we got signing up to join the U.S. military to get this turned back on. You just try. That's how you piss off Americans today. You can bomb Pearl Harbor again and nobody will care, but you shut down TikTok or Instagram and you're going to have a bunch of pissed off Americans like you haven't ever seen. And I'm somewhat joking, but I'm somewhat not.
I'm taking you very serious, Bruce.
Listen,
I'm
you want to get
very serious.
you want to get full support of the United States and all of its assets behind the war. You start messing with our communications technology in this country, and you just wait and see.
Yeah. Even a more basic one will sound even more funny. Yeah, go down to Orlando, Putin. Fuck with the mouse. See how that works out with you. You know, that'll change things around. You're not going to get away with fucking with the mouse. We're not going to tolerate that. You know, you have Americans, like you say, not being able to be on the internet. Oh yeah, that's not a good thing. That's like sinking a ship turned up to 11. That actually might get you nuked.
This cracks me up. I think Bruce made this comment. These fucking morons that don't even know what boomers are. There's no Vietnam veterans here. God damn.
He's just one. He's just one generation off. Just one generation off. My parents are boomers. My grandfather was a World War II vet, as was many other family members from his generation. But hey, it's okay. Knowledge is not what it used to be.
Well, I don't know, guys. I think we've reached culmination on this topic. Do we have any secondary things we want to kick around? I know we haven't had a live stream in a few weeks.
Well, since we have kind of beat this one down, I think you're right. We're at culmination. How do everybody see about Ukraine wrapping up, or is it just going to devolve into a stalemate?
Well, I've been kind of putting myself in Putin's shoes and asking myself, what would I do? And I think the best course of action for him would be, at this point, to secure the Donbass, stop his offensive operations, declare a ceasefire, secure Donbass, wait a couple years, and then invade the rest of Ukraine. That's what I would do.
Good point. Good point.
I think Ukraine's banking on the fact that eventually they're going to pull out of those newly annexed regions, kind of like, their failed intervention in Afghanistan. And I don't know if that's going to happen, because you never had the Soviets annex Afghanistan like they did in Ukraine. So I don't know. And I think the Russians had been on the offensive. Now they're going to be on the defensive. They're going to dig in, and let's face it, regardless of how the Russians have performed, it's a lot easier to fight that defensive battle, particularly in their technological, advantageous position with their mass artillery and air power. Now Ukraine has obviously been plussed up with advanced weapon systems such as like HIMARS artillery and M777s and drones and things of that nature. But I think once the Russians dig in their heels, I don't know. I don't think you're going to be able to have a foreseeable Ukrainian offensive that's going to be able to breach that and retake those annexed areas. So ultimately, what I think is going to end up happening, there's going to have to be some sort of true ceasefire, and that's going to have to be on both sides. I don't know what that looks like, but that's the only way I could see that particular conflict ending, because I don't think the Russians are going to pick up and leave, particularly after they annex that area.
Well, the only way that the Ukrainians are going to stop, because it's their territory and they want it back, is Putin's got to convince NATO to stop giving arms, because when that happens, it stops. And your historical precedent for that is the Yom Kippur War of 1973. As the Israelis were crossing the canal, the United States said stop and turned off the spigot. And the Israelis had no choice but to pull back. And it'll be the same way. We'll just tell the Ukrainians to stop, and when they don't, we'll just say, oh, there's all the supplies.
That's such a good point, Les. We certainly, not just the United States, I should say, that we've got our thumb on that throttle, right? We can turn it up, but we can just as easily turn it off. And I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly what we're doing. We've got people that know a whole lot more about this than we do, that have got their finger on the pulse of that right now. A couple of things I wanted to address is Ukraine joining NATO, there seem to be a bunch of comments where people are saying like, well, when Ukraine joins NATO, that's going to be World War III. Guys, NATO's not going to accept Ukraine in a time of conflict. So this war is going to have to come to a resolution. It's going to have to cool way off. And then at that point, Ukraine can start looking at joining NATO if that's something that they want to do. That's way down the war. It's not like we're going to reach out to them and go, hey, we got an extra slot. You guys want to hop in? We're ready to go to war against Russia. It doesn't work that way. That's not how NATO is structured. So that's not how it works. Okay. It's not gonna be Ukraine joining NATO and then World War III. This thing will be way cooled off before that happens. I agree.
Georgia is a prime example of that.
Right. Sure. Until, yeah, exactly. So, and so to Brent's point, Russia is going to need an off ramp. I don't see an off ramp for Russia right now. Where it's too hot right now. Russia needs an off ramp where Putin can assuming he remains the commander there in Russia, cannot be humiliated and can spin it somehow as a victory for Russia. Now, it may be that his spin is we've got these Russian speaking peoples in Eastern Ukraine and we've annexed them in and we draw new borders. I don't want to see that happen, but because I believe that gives into the idea that one sovereign country can attack another and just take land for the sake of happening. And I liken it to the United States here. It would be just like Mexico attacking Texas and going, well, we're just annexing the land where we've got Spanish speaking people, and all of Texas and New Mexico and Arizona would fall to Mexico. That's just not how it works, guys. That's not how it works. But I don't disagree, since we're not talking about our land and since we're not talking about our people, that we don't work that into some type of cooling negotiations to at least concede some land to Russia. And let me say this, those of you who buy into that BS, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. Russia doesn't give two shits about people that are Russian speaking or who they allow themselves to or what they care about. It's not that it just so happens that the land that they occupy happens to be strategically located Beto would welcome this. I know Beto would support this plan, guys. Beto would support this plan, but it's not, there's no way you can say that it just so happens that you've got Russian speaking people right exactly where there's land that is strategically located that would be beneficial for Russia to have. It just doesn't make it. Just what are the chances of that? None. So that may be what he's saying, but the reality is when you look at a map and you say, hey, Russia, if you could have any territory adjoining your country anywhere, which would you want? Which would be most strategically beneficial to you? It happens to be that same location. This is all about a land grab, and this is nothing more. This puts Russia, if they're able to hold Crimea and the beach areas of southeastern Ukraine, that's just tactically beneficial to Russia, regardless of what language those people there speak.
What you got, Chad? You've been quiet for a while.
I don't really have much to add to that. I agree with Bruce. I think maybe in 20 years, 10, 20 years, they'll probably attack somewhere else, or may continue into Ukraine. But I think annexing probably what's most likely going to happen is what Bruce is talking about, where they just annex the Donbass region and hopefully call it a day, regroup, maybe secure the region, and then try again at a later point. I think that's what's most likely to happen.
What I am interested in seeing, we haven't brushed on this, but I'm a bit fascinated with the winter warfare. Because I came into this back in, I don't know, we did a stream in December when this thing first kicked off, maybe January. And I sort of mistakenly expected for a winter war to occur where Russians and, I almost said Russians and Germans, but thinking of World War II, where Russians and Germans, or in this case, Russians and Ukrainian, continue to fight once the ground freezes. We didn't see that last year. It seems like that's not conducive to modern warfare for whatever reason. And so I'm really curious to see what goes on now. I think part of this huge offensive by the Ukrainians and this retaking of Ukrainian land that they're doing right now, it looks like it's sort of a last minute effort to seize as much territory as they can, shore up new lines before this winter freeze comes. And I'm really interested. Why? Is it because things are going to stalemate while it's frozen over before new offensives can start in the spring? I don't know. I'm learning as this thing goes on, but I find it a bit fascinating. And it looks to me, at least, like that's what's going on, because with this massive push that we've seen Ukraine launching this offensive, they're reaching the point they're having to be very careful not to overstretch their lines and then end up getting in trouble by a Russian counterattack. Of course, that's warfare 101. So I'm very interested in seeing what happens with that. And guys, I don't necessarily take a position on it. I'm learning as we go.
Yeah, interesting point. The Russians were always kind of credited as being able to fight in NATO. I mean, that was the big thing, or excuse me, fight in the winter. That was NATO's big worry during the Cold War. That, the Russians were better equipped to fight in the cold. Doesn't seem to be playing out. It seems like a lot of our assumptions about the Russians aren't playing out. Will they fight in the wintertime? Don't know. I'm willing to make the prediction right now that as poorly as they performed in the summer, they're not going to perform any better in the winter.
Well, I mentioned this earlier, and I'm somewhat of an expert because I watched a YouTube video on it. But Russia has 2 Arctic tank divisions, and I want to say both of them were up around Finland, which, okay, that makes sense. There's a little bit of snow around Finland. And one of them came down in the initial attack back around February, March, and they kind of got wiped out. So their performance wasn't very good. And I'm not sure if Russia is willing to lose another one. I don't know if they're rebuilding that tank division or what, but they're going to definitely have to revamp what they did before and try something differently if they try something at all. And I agree, frozen ground seems to be good for tanks, right? Like we all know that, but what's it bad for? It's bad for people digging in. And artillery's boss out there right now, right? And that may be one reason that neither side is wanting to do a whole lot of moving when the ground gets frozen.
And one thing winter's not good for is diesel fuel. Keeping it from freezing is a pain. Keeping it from gumming up your engines is a pain. So that's one of the things. Winter war is not easy at all. And it's a reason it doesn't happen a lot. You notice that wars tend to happen in hot places for a reason. It's hard fighting in the cold. And I don't think the Russians are just that well equipped for it as everybody thought. I mean, look at their gear. I mean, NATO Western gear is light years ahead of the Russian equivalents. The Russians have fought in it for hundreds of years, but just because you've used it for 100 years doesn't mean it's the best thing. I'm not expecting them to fight in the wintertime, and the Ukrainians fighting in the wintertime, they've just been fighting for the survival of the country. They haven't had a chance to really prepare for winter. So I would think you're right, Bruce. Everybody's going to try to get the best position they get and can hold on to it.
I don't know about that, Les, because the Ukrainians have been fighting for the last, 8 years against the Russian-backed separatists in those, Donbass regions. I mean, they've been fighting in the winter. Like they've got combat veterans. They've had combat veterans from the get-go on this.
Yeah, good point.
I think maybe the difference here is morale. The pro-Russian separatists, their morale is high. They stand a lot to gain, right? Ukrainians, they're fighting for their country. They stand a lot to gain. What do Russian conscripts stand to gain by freezing their asses off in a Ukrainian winter? If you've got bad morale, you got morale problems now, throw them into an Arctic situation. We all know how challenging and difficult just day-to-day life can be, much less when you're under gunfire, when you're in a sub-freezing situation constantly. You've not just got the enemy on your backs, but you got Mother Nature, and she can be a bitch.
I want to also bring up the question that Crossfire Packs posted, and that was, what do you think the NATO response would be for small tactical nuke used in Ukraine. And I don't know. I don't think that would trigger a nuclear response from NATO.
No, but I think there will be a conventional response. And it's hard to say what that could be. It might be something just as blatant as all of a sudden the Ukrainian Air Force gets massively reinforced by NATO air squadrons, like NATO moves into the Western Ukraine, or it provides a much more effective air defense. Like Patriot batteries start popping up everywhere all over Ukraine. All of a sudden, Kiev is protected by Iron Dome. Things like that. It might be NATO taking a very active role in shutting down the Black Sea, for example.
Drone strikes too.
Right.
And was that, Chad?
Drone strikes.
Straight up. Yep.
And do you want to be that? Do you want to be that Russian unit that fired off that nuke? You know you're going to disappear in about 2 days, right? I mean the retaliation on your unit, even if it's conventional, and it can absolutely be conventional. Don't sell conventional weapons short. The one thing that the West seems to have, the U.S. seems to have, for example, is pinpoint accuracy. We've seen this time and time again. Pinpoint accuracy. We can send a cruise missile right into a mud hut in the middle of the desert somewhere. We'll have no trouble taking out very specific and very targeted Russian targets if we need to. So I think that that's a message that Russian units are getting also. We're seeing it. We know it, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it with how they're hiding their tanks in the woods, man, to get these vehicles wedged in those woodlands like they do. It's beyond belief. You can't see them until the artillery hits them. And then the artillery shells clear the forest, and all of a sudden there's this beautiful forest with all these fireballs in it, where the tanks and vehicles are cooking off. So they're aware that they're being watched and that they're vulnerable. We're also seeing it with the T80 thermal protection that they're starting to put on their tanks. I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen this, but it's essentially it looks like pillows or big blankets, big comforters, but I'm sure it's some type of thermal material that literally covers the entire top of the tank. And that's to reduce the heat signature that this tank is putting off, because they know that they're being watched with thermal cameras, and they know that they've got missiles that target thermally from the top, and they're trying to dissipate that somewhat. And that's some of the new top of the line technology that's coming out of Russia, the relatively new stuff on these T80s that you're not seeing on other tanks. But there's a reason for that. We put those defenses up because there's a threat, and we need those defenses. And that's something that we're seeing there. We're seeing there with Russia. So yeah, I find that's all interesting stuff to me. But it's definitely a change in warfare. One of the first times that I've seen on the battlefield where a military is actively constructing thermal defenses to help protect against these thermal targeting anti-tank devices.
You bring up a good point there, Bruce, because bringing up another historical thing during Desert Storm and everything, the Air Force went tank plinking. Imagine just in a response to that, the U.S. Air Force or NATO Air Forces decide to go tank plinking in eastern Ukraine. That's going to be a fairly short campaign.
I think we're just saying, in terms of combat in Ukraine, like kind of like what we did in the GWAT, right? When the enemy started utilizing IEDs, we started developing counters to that, vehicles with V-shaped holes, MRAPs and all this other stuff, plussing up body armor, which, which in my opinion was the wrong move. You started seeing regular infantrymen look like goddamn turtles. And then we go into Afghanistan and guys are fucking dropping like heat casualties because they're used to these ginormous freaking body armor. But I honestly think that's what's going on is, they go into Ukraine, they face this massive anti-tank, rocket threat from javelins and other NATO type anti-tank missiles. And we're seeing Russian countermeasures being devised and purposed to defeat those specific threats. So it's quite interesting, particularly being on the U.S., from on the outside looking in, seeing how the Russians are adapting to a lot of the weapon systems that we utilize, right? So it's like the javelins, our weapon system, how the Russians countering that. So, which, to be quite frank, it's not the greatest thing, because if a conflict does happen between us, we're going with what we got. We're going with javelins, right? We're not going with some fucking, newest generation anti-tank missile that's hot off the shelf. That's not how it works. Think like Korean War, when North Korea invaded South Korea, like US troops got, shuttled in there as quickly as possible. And they were using like World War II era bazookas that were just bouncing off, the latest and greatest Soviet supplied T-34 tanks. And it wasn't stopping them. And those US troops were essentially getting steamrolled. It wasn't until like the super bazooka started getting on scene that they were able to develop, effective resistance against that stuff. So, I hope people in the U.S. are watching, and I'm sure they are watching the Russian countermeasures, right? Because it's not just Russia. China's watching this from the outside looking in also. And I hope we're developing the next level in terms of anti-tank weapons, artillery, HIMARS artillery, because, we provided all this stuff to Ukraine, and yeah, a lot of it's working great, but, we also know that Ukraine's one of the most corrupt nations in the world. A lot of that stuff probably ain't staying there. If it hasn't already left Ukraine, it definitely will the day after that war ends. So, and it's probably not going to our buddies. Let's just say that.
I think innovation is our strength. I'm sure we have some geek in some developmental lab and some defense contracting company that's devising the newest innovation for that. So I think we're pretty good at that.
No, absolutely. I think you're spot on about that, Chad, because that'll be our solution. We'll invent a device to deal with the problem. You look at other militaries in their histories, like the British will find a way to adapt something, i.e., down in the Falklands, they take out a submarine using an anti-tank weapon. We will go out and invent special weapons just to kill submarines, and they'll be very good at it, and they'll work really well. And I think as the war goes on and we apply the lessons from it, you'll see a new generation of anti-tank weapons. If, say, the war ends in 2 years, 10 years from now, we'll start fielding a new anti-tank weapon as the replacement Javelin. Or we'll have Javelin 2, or it does something it didn't do before. It goes twice as far. Or, it can pick up a heat signature it couldn't pick up before, just like we've done with Sidewinder. 50-year-old missile, but the ones we make today are so far beyond the original ones back in the 1950s, it's not even funny.
All right, guys, I think we definitely reached culmination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the horn. We'll start with Les, and then just final thoughts and everything we talked about, and then we'll wrap this up. So Les, you get the con.
Well, I don't know if the Third World War has begun, or if it's going to begin, or if it's not going to happen at all. Definitely hoping for not happening at all, because it's not going to be good, whether it's nuclear or not. Anyways, we live in interesting times, to say the least. As for what's going on my channel, about ready to post some videos later this week of some interesting interviews with Doc Larson about his books. So I hope everybody tunes in, and we'll have some good One Shepherd content coming after that.
Yeah, I'm with Les. I don't want to go out and predict World War III or not. I guess I'm a bit of an optimist and hoping that it doesn't happen. I'm hoping that Russia doesn't use nuclear or biological or chemical weapons inside of Ukraine. And I hope that we can continue on with a proxy war that is relatively conventional, and we can minimize civilian casualties. But I'm a bit of an optimist there. So this thing could all go sideways tomorrow. We could be having a new stream next week where we're talking about tactical nukes being used in Ukraine or any other type of absolutely tragic and devastating situation. But I'm hoping that that's not going to happen. I'm hoping that things will stabilize, and that at some point we can bring an end to this and stop the killing and get back to talking about other things. But this is the war in our time. And I know just by the comments and the viewers, so many of you are interested in this as well. So that's let's just hope for the sake of the Ukrainian people and the Russian people for that matter too, that we can all bring this to some type of peaceful resolution. But it seems to be very difficult when you've got the leader of Russia, like Vladimir Putin, that this seems to be hell-bent, focused on war and civilian casualties, and really dragging this thing out. So we'll see, guys. I'm hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst.
Yeah, like Bruce, I'm going to take the optimist approach. I don't believe World War III is around the corner. Putin's threats to me are at least just simple saber rattling. No one can afford to use nukes right now. You know, I do admit that we are in a delicate situation as far as the world stage goes, where it could easily happen. However, the eradication of large amounts of the population around the world doesn't seem like a very popular move for anybody, including Vladimir Putin. I think Putin has a lot to worry about within his own borders right now. And I would even go so far as to say that we are more likely to see a coup in Moscow than we would see nuclear weapons flying out of Moscow.
All right. So my final thoughts on this, I've got high expectations and hopes that, World War III does not transpire. But I do think Ukraine and Taiwan are definitely potential flashpoints. And I think the two are essentially mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is if Taiwan were to pop off tomorrow, I think Vladimir Putin will ramp up Ukrainian operations and vice versa. So, we need to keep an eye on that. We need to tread lightly. I'm not against supporting Ukraine in their war effort against the Russians. I think anybody that, stands on the opposite side of the United States, we need to, wage, unconventional war against them, and particularly in situations like this. So I have deep reservations, however, about depleting U.S. stockpiles and just blanket giving to the Ukrainians. That really bothers me, and I think we've depleted our U.S. stockpiles too much. And so, man, I hope there's more accountability going on with all that stuff. I highly doubt that is the case, though. So, we'll see where this happens. I think Chad's got a good point. I think there is a good possibility of some sort of regime change in Putin, and that's obviously a COA. But I don't see Putin pulling out of Ukraine anytime soon. I think they annexed. They're there to stay. They're there for the long haul, and they're going to dig in their heels and they're going to defend those regions. So unless the Ukrainians and the Russians come to some sort of ceasefire on that, I don't see that going any further than it is right now. So I guess that's my final thoughts on that. I do want to pimp my own channel here. If you haven't seen the MacV-SOG video, be sure to go and check that out. Bruce and I worked really hard on it. It is a very good video, and we put a lot of work into it. So make sure you guys go there and watch that if you haven't already. And we got Winter Forge coming up, put on by SNS Training Solutions. It will be a joint training event with One Shepherd. And it should be the biggest Winter Forge ever. I think it's going to be a week long, and it'll be an awesome, excellent training event. Cold weather, utilizing Miles Gear, Force on Force training. So if you guys have not looked into that, be sure to go to the SNS Training Solutions webpage and check out that event. I've gone for the last couple of years. It's just been fantastic. So that's all I got on tonight, guys. Again, check out the MacV-SOG video, and I appreciate everybody joining in. We've had freaking well over 300 viewers for the better part of the night. So it's been a great stream. So thanks to my panelists for coming on tonight, and appreciate everybody joining in. Have a good night.